said the government is willing to activate the GNT. What have you heard so far from the unions?
Well, since the letter I wrote to the unions indicating that the government is prepared to activate the GNT, I have not got formal replies from the unions and the associations, because often we think we are only dealing with unions, but that's not so. We are dealing with associations, for example, the Police Welfare Association. The government is moving in the direction of appointing a chairman of the GNT. And I have held discussions with potential persons to invite them to serve as chairperson of the GNT. So I hope that process will be completed fairly soon and that we can proceed to bring finality to this process.
Obviously, Prime Minister, time is against St. Lucia. The deficit is fairly substantial and it's growing. How much time do you have?
The country doesn't have time, Pete. And you're absolutely correct. The more this process is delayed, the more the deficit worsens, because it means that we have to engage in expenditure during the period that these discussions and negotiations are taking place. And the more the negotiations and discussions are extended, the greater will be the gap to adjust. The fact of the matter is that the market is also not waiting for us. The situation with the financial markets in the Eastern Caribbean is exceedingly serious, that not many institutions or investors are prepared to lend governments in the region, and we need really to understand that. This is not a situation now where we can borrow ourselves out of the problem. As much as it requires patience, it requires understanding, it requires goodwill, equally it is a case that we do not have time on our side, and it is vital we come to an agreement as quickly as possible.
When is it that you are going to say, this is it? Because you have said previously that the government, if there's no consensus, will have to do what is in the best interest of the country.
Yes.
At what point, a month's time, 2 months' time, would you say, I really can't wait anymore?
At the last meeting with the unions and associations, the president of the National Workers Union made a plea to the government. I'm going to paraphrase his words. He said, in effect, trust us, the government needs to trust us on this. We are not engaging in a different agenda. We too want to help the government to solve the problems that confront the country. It is in the spirit of that statement that the government went in the direction of conceding to the establishment of a GNT. Now, the unions present at that meeting more or less also agreed that the window for the negotiations should be 2 weeks because of the urgency of the situation. Of course, it doesn't mean that if the window is 2 weeks that you're likely to secure agreement within 2 weeks. But I think what is important is that they understood full well that time was against us. I'm a very patient person. I'm a very understanding person. And so too is the government that I lead. And contrary to what was peddled in the public domain, following the passage of the budget, this year's budget, the government of St. Lucia did commence discussions, first by briefing the unions as well as civil society on the challenges that faced us. And then, of course, to engage them in the discussion to see whether we can find consensus. Consensus is not easy to build, Pete. Let me say this. I understand the discomfort and the agony of the people of St. Lucia over this matter. And never ever forget that I was a former trade union leader, former president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union. And therefore, I understand what it is. Never before have the people of St. Lucia been asked to make sacrifice on an issue. We have never had the experience of going through difficulty. Other countries have had. The countries around us have had. Dominica has had. Jamaica is now locked into a particular experience. St. Kitts had a structural adjustment program with the IMF. Grenada is wrestling with this problem. Barbados is wrestling with this problem. I really believe that it is in the best interest of the government and the people of St. Lucia to secure agreement, and there's a united approach to this problem. If that can happen, we are really sending out a strong signal to investors to our regional financial markets and to others who have interest in investing in this country, because we are sending a message that this is a country that is together, that is prepared to deal with the problems that confront it. And so, to return to your question, I would certainly want to give the window of the 2 weeks that the unions requested and the unions suggested. I will certainly agree to that. The government will certainly proceed on that basis, but it has to be understood that I can't allow the country to bleed as it is bleeding, and we need to arrive at some kind of position at the soonest. I know that it is difficult, it is not easy, but the point is together we can resolve this problem.
But Prime Minister, at the risk of repeating myself,
Sure.
At what point will you say this is the cutoff point? I have to maneuver, otherwise I will be outmaneuvered.
I don't know if there's an issue of being outmaneuvered at all. Let's put it this way, and I think I'm going to repeat some of the key points that I made to you, Pete. First of all, the unions requested that the government appoint a negotiating team. We are moving in that direction. We have indicated that we are going to proceed that way, and I hope we can have a person appointed fairly soon. The second key element, and this is not a suggestion of the government, the unions and associations who attended that meeting said, let us agree to a window of 2 weeks. Very clearly when the 2 weeks is ended, if of course it is clear that there is no hope of securing agreement, it is at that point that the question that you raised becomes relevant.
Prime Minister, one of the concerns has been that should a 5% wage cut be implemented, there would still be a financing gap of some $57 million. Some of your critics have basically conjectured, is this the tip of the icebergs? Are there going to be additional taxes? How do you respond?
I think I answered that during the budget presentation, that I do not believe that the way out of this crisis is necessarily through additional taxation. For example, Pete, I'm on record as indicating clearly that we do not support an increase of VAT from 15% to 17%. We can avoid all of this. It is true that the International Monetary Fund that looked at the solution economy suggested that there be a 10% cut. But we believe that if we go for a 5% reduction in wages, engage in other expenditure reduction measures, and of course at the same time obtain additional revenues through some of the measures we have implemented, then of course there is greater potential to close that gap. So yes, it's a challenge, but I think we can meet that challenge by the measures that we have announced. It is an issue that the public is right to draw attention to, because if of course you have a gap of $75 million and all you are doing by a 5% reduction is to close that gap by $18 million, then very clearly the enormity of the challenge is demonstrated simply by the remaining gap. So we'd have to look to see how revenue performs in respect of the other measures that the government has been implementing over the past couple of years.
Prime Minister, how do you respond to some of your critics who accuse you of making contradictory statements? Such as, for example, they say you promised better days, and then now they propose wage cuts, belt tightening, and so on. That the economy has turned a corner, but now the situation is that the fiscal deficit is widening. How would you respond?
No, Pete, by the way, you're wrong. The fiscal deficit is not widening.
Well, it's serious.
I made it very clear that, in fact, we had a fiscal deficit of 9.2, 9.6%. It's now down to 5.6%. So we have to be careful. Don't allow the critics to guide you with information.
Yes. Well,
but before I proceed, I just want to emphasize, and I'll come to the heart of the question, Pete, that at 5.6%, we need to get a deficit lower than 4%. So the real issue now is how do we summon the discipline, the will? How do we implement the correct measures to get that deficit below 4%? Because that's really the magic number. We need a deficit at least at about 3% to signal that the fiscal situation in the government of St. Lucia is in good hands and that the fiscal challenges are being resolved. Now let's come back to the point that you make about what my critics say. The first thing to bear in mind is this: it's always easy to attempt to judge politicians by what they have said in the past. Now I wanted to look at something. Do you notice that to date I have avoided criticizing the opposition or laying blame for this economic situation at the feet of the opposition? Perhaps the only thing that I have said is this, that our problems began when the former government increased the salaries of public officers by 14.5%. And the statistics will bear that out, because you began to see a widening of the deficit and very sharp borrowing to meet the cost of that increase. Now, that's unpalatable. A lot of people don't want to hear that. Certainly, I know a lot of civil servants who believe that that is an irrelevant argument. That's not what the statistics are saying. Now, I don't believe that I should be engaging in an assault on the opposition on that matter, and at the same time seek the consensus of the people's solution. I don't think that's right. I think hard as it is even for the opposition itself, that it is necessary for us to have some common ground on this issue. So I want to first of all clarify that point. Of course, my party argued for better days, and I believe, despite the financial challenges we have, the fiscal issues that we are dealing with the issue of better days. That is why we have created an initiative called NICE. We have 1,600 persons employed. You just look at the record of this government in respect of rehabilitation post-Thomas. Look at the number of bridges we have built. Look at the number of slides that we are taking care of. Look at the fact that we have been able to provide our school children with computers. Look at the fact that we have been able to give each school child entering a secondary school $500. Look at the fact that we are moving slowly in the direction of improving our infrastructure island-wide. Right now, we have about 3 or 4 major roads in the south of the island being attended to, so that we are conscious and aware, Pete, of the need that while we engage in some belt-tightening, in some fiscal adjustments, that the progress in the country has to continue. But perhaps I can draw your attention to another vital and important index. Let's take tourism, Pete. Let's take tourism. Last year, we had a 6% increase in arrivals in this country. It wasn't enough to give us the kind of growth we needed because of the contraction in the construction sector. But look at what's happening this year. The numbers are continuing to rise, which means that normalcy is returning to the sector. And when this government inherited office in 2011, there were 3 properties in the hands of receivers. The hotel at Marigo, now called Capella, the hotel at Chalk, now called St. James Club, and the Landings. The 3 properties was joined by 1 other shortly after we came into office, smugglers, because the Bank of St. Lucia took action in respect of that hotel. What is the situation today? 3 of those hotels are now out of the hands of receivers. They're now in the hands of new owners, and I'm hoping that very soon we'll have very good news in respect of smugglers. What it is saying, Pete, is this, that in respect of the private sector, investment in the private sector, we are beginning to see stability. We're beginning to see movement. Investors are developing confidence in this economy and in this government. The problem, however, the outstanding problem, is the problem at the end of the government, at the heart of the government, that is to say, the fiscal imbalance.
Finally, Prime Minister.
Sure.
In this situation with the unions, are you very hopeful?
That's a very good question, Pete. I have suffered as much anguish as other people. And there are times I really wish I can explain to people how difficult and how hard this is for me, ideologically and otherwise. I go to bed sometimes and remember that I was a former president of the St. Lucia Teachers Union. I fought for increased wages for teachers in my time. And here I am at a crossroads dealing with a very difficult situation. But you know what? In all major decisions that politicians have to make, Pete, they have to make a judgment as to whether what they're doing is the right thing. And I have agonized over this. I've been agonizing over this for months as I looked at the figures of the performance of our economy. And I know in my heart that it is the right thing. It may be a bitter pill to swallow. I may go down in the history of the St. Lucia Teachers Union, for example, as a leader that may have betrayed the very membership of the union that I once led. But it's a price I have to pay for my country. And I accept this. I believe, too, Pete, that there's great value in consensus. There is tremendous benefit to be gained if we can agree to move forward as one, that we understand the challenges, we are prepared to make the sacrifices. As I said earlier to you, Pete, that is the best signal we could send out to the financial markets and to the region. But very clearly, the people of St. Lucia elected me for a purpose, for a reason. The entire St. Lucia is my constituency. I have to act, and the government that I lead have to act in the best interests of the people of this country. So while I hope, while I seek to persuade, to encourage, to cajole the unions to do this on behalf of this country, to make this sacrifice on behalf of the people of this country, to understand that this country has been good to them. If that fails, then clearly I have to exercise the burden of the leadership that I was trusted to, or trusted with by the electorate.
Prime Minister, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure to us.